theme is divergent, and we have the opportunity to hear from a very interesting, kind, creative human being. Scott McCormick is an artist, he's a photographer, he's a brand strategist, and he has worked with some of the most iconic musicians over the last few years. Scott was born in Waukegan, Illinois, and started playing the piano at the age of 10. At age 13, he began his 21-year music career by playing gospel churches on the south side of Chicago. Since then, he's performed with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, written and scored for ESPN and Disney, and led and performed in the internationally touring band Boulder Acoustic Society. He's taught alongside Grammy, Tony, and Academy Award-winning artists and Boys and Girls Club of Greater Washington, in tandem with the Juilliard School of Music. However, in 2011, he found himself burnout and began a new career, starting his company, McCormick Photo and Design. Here to tell us about that divergent, wild adventure is our friend, Scott McCormick. Welcome him to the stage. Take yourselves off mute and let's give him a big round of applause.
Cute.
Well, that was sweet. All right. Well, we are going to try something completely different today. I think the goal of this presentation is to illustrate divergence through a divergent path that we get to choose. So my attempt at this has taken me through probably 20 to 25 versions of writing and rewriting and calling Dave and RJ and trying to brainstorm more and more and more, and my partner Bronwyn and asking her to listen to 1,000 different versions, and my roommate Justin asking him, to sit down and listen to all of this. So I feel like I've tried this presentation so many different times that this morning I honestly have no idea how it's going to go. It should be really fun. But isn't that divergence, right? So we're going to focus mostly on divergent thinking, which is, in my mind, kind of a subset of creativity. And through that, we have established a choose your own adventure presentation. We'll be asking you with polls what direction we would like to take. So with that being said, I'm treating this kind of similar to real life. Real life has one path. And at the end of that path, while we may reminisce about things that we might have missed, we don't get to try it again. So all I'm asking is that we think carefully for each decision, and we actually try to go down a path that we're most curious about learning. So with all of that in mind, I will add a precursor of, we are going to talk about some real hippie shit. So it should be really weird. So the whole thing starts with an exercise in imagination. So I want you to picture yourself lying in a park with a book on your chest. The sun is going down and you're waking up. You have 4 things that you own. You have a suitcase, you have a bicycle, you have kind of a crappy camera, and you have a laptop, which is wonderful. You pack up everything and you head out to the nearest diner that has Wi-Fi, and you can sit there all night and have your coffee. But your life has been completely altered. Everything that you've known through your whole existence has changed. Your mother has died. You've gotten a divorce. Your father quit talking to you because of said divorce. All your friends, you've removed yourself from any past. And all you can focus on is, what do I do now? I don't want to do what I've been doing. Everything is gone. So where do I want to go from here? And that leads us, I think, to the most important question of this entire slide. What do? Do you take a breath and imagine, or do you get to work? So here's our first poll.
We're going to stop and imagine.
Oh, I love that. Okay, cool.
All right.
Okay, so if we stop and imagine. So why stop? And what kind of impact does that have? And why are we in such a hurry all the time? So with this idea, when we stop and take a breath, the entire world opens up for imagination and creativity. There's a guy that we might be talking about a couple of times through this presentation, depending on which route we go. But there's a guy recently I discovered named Neville Goddard. I really like his take on a lot of kind of heady thoughts. But when he thinks about imagination, he says, imagination can make your desires a reality. And he says, you know, there's a wide difference between thinking of what you want in this world versus thinking from what you want in this world. So what I love about that notion is when we put ourselves into an imaginative state, when we stop and we allow ourselves the breath, when we put ourselves in an imaginative state, we start to realize that we're creating from a world that already exists in our mind. Simultaneously, I also think we create our own reality, and we tend to kind of apologize for it. I think we've seen this probably with a bunch of clients and a bunch of friends. You know, like if you're working on a rebrand or something for your company, and you know, your initial instinct is to apologize when you send out an email saying like, sorry, we're working on a new website, or sorry, you know, you've created this reality in that other people don't know that you're working on a website. They don't know that you're working on a rebrand, but your version of reality is something that you feel like everyone else is a part of. And so what I love about this idea is that we have a notion of taking a breath, imagining what the world can be, creating that from desire, and then that gives us a moment to go forward, and it gives us a moment to create opportunity and create a brand new world for ourselves. Whenever I teach photography, I have an exercise that I challenge people to do, and that's stop looking at a street light and telling it it's a street light. It's not doing that to you. It's not looking at you saying, well, there's a hairy guy. It's saying nothing. And so it's our job as photographers and creatives to realize it's more about form, it's about shape, it's about contrast, it's about color. All of these ideas can remove your imagination from what you know to be reality and can allow you now to produce a much more interesting story about that streetlight in terms of like, how did it get there? Did it grow from the ground? Did someone fly in an airplane and throw it and it's stuck in? Or did a giant walk by and use it as a toothpick? You know, I mean, the world of reality opens up when you stop and take a breath and stop removing a label from everything. So how do you get to this point? How do you get to the understanding of creating your own reality and creating your own thought? Well, I think it starts by learning. And so when we look at learning, you have to ask the questions of yourself, why learn? And how do I learn? I think these are pretty wonderful questions, because I have a rule personally, which is if I start to think I know something, I have to stop and imagine that maybe I don't. And it's time for me to begin my journey of learning more. I think thinking you know an answer can lead to arrogance and hardship. But continuing the path of learning is the only true way, I think, to break free. I also think of that in terms of how you learn. There's, obviously there's a ton of research about how we learn. There's, like, are we oral learners? Do we have to experience, all of that aside, I think there's this really wonderful memory that I think maybe all of us have, which is we put so much heft on almost like edutainment, or we put so much heft on popular, fun, experiential ways to learn. But what about your typing teacher? Remember your typing teacher? Their job was literally just to say like F, 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 D, D, D. But if you had typing class, everybody in that class wanted to type faster than the person next to them. And there was like kind of a healthy competition going on. And everyone in that class left there knowing how to type. And I think the teacher really their whole job was just to continue saying the same thing over and over and over. And so I think we hold learning to this high pedestal of it has to be something that keeps us intrinsically invested in it. It really is just do it over and over and over and seek something new. This slide is mostly just because I want to tell this story, but also it's such a great example of learning and how it backfires. I was doing an album cover for this slide, and I wanted to learn more about electricity, and in particular AC and DC power and how they work. And so I said, I'm going to make lightning. And so I set out to make lightning, and I called an electrical engineer buddy of mine. And I said, hey, I want to make lightning. And he goes, yeah, of course you do. Jesus. All right. Can't we ever just do something easy? So I said, no, we're going to do it. And he goes, okay, well, do you want to use an alternate current or do you want to use a direct current? And I said, fill me in. I don't know what that means. And so he says, all right, well, alternate current basically says like it finds the path of least resistance and it can go all wonky and everywhere, right? This is the things like you've seen those little balls that you put your hands on and like, little lightning bolts go everywhere, right? So that's alternate current. That's Tesla. You make that with a Tesla coil. He said, or you could go direct current, which says, regardless of path, if this part is charged and this part is charged, there we go, they'll hit each other. And I was like, well, I got a camera, I got all these lights. It makes a lot of sense if that goes that way. Let me just admit right now, that was by far the way worse choice. We ended up having to generate 450,000 volts of electricity in my tiny, tiny living room to try to make a 7-inch arc of lightning that I could take a picture of. So what happened is it took us about 3.5 months of burning through insulation every single day and retrying and setting up all these computer monitors so we could generate this amount of electricity or voltage and then creating a thing called a March generator. And we just like went absolutely nuts. But the best part of the whole thing was this man looked like a Greek god. He has blonde hair and he's ripped and he's tall and extremely handsome. And I am quite short and hairy. And the problem with high voltage is it's not going to stop your heart if it hits you, but it will light all your clothes on fire. And so we had to work shirtless on this entire project. And at the time, my partner kept coming home and her hair on her arms would stand up, because the ionized air was so intense. And then she was greeted by this Greek god, good afternoon, So then my goofy ass, like going, hey, and she'd like look at him and go, well, hi, Jeff, it's great to see you. And then she'd look at my doofy ass. She'd be like, we have to do that. Like, get rid of this. Like, stop it. My hair is standing up. I'm going to leave you. Like, this is enough. So anyway, point is, we were trying to make all of this electricity. I'm like on the verge of losing my entire relationship because this man is super handsome. And I call this guy in Russia, who's a professor who has made now 6 inches of lightning, which was kind of like the record at that time. I call him and I say, hey, I want to make 7 inches of lightning. And he says like, okay, well, you know, he's asking about all this like really expensive equipment. He's like saying like, well, do you have radiometer? I'm like, no. And he goes, oh, well, okay. Do you have this? Do you have this? And I'm like, no. I have like $200 worth of shit, man. Like, I don't, you know. And he goes, and this is for photo? And I said, yeah. And he says, have you thought of Photoshop? And I was like, you're a dick, you know. It's so, so anyway, point is, deadline comes up. I have 1 more day. And on that day, we got it. And this is it. We got lightning. We got it. We want to know the best part of all of this learning and all of this work. I took the photo and I loved it. And then I went, you know what though? That pole's like a little too thick. And I don't know, maybe it should be black and white. And it kind of feels like too fit. I Photoshopped the shit out of this thing. And so it really didn't matter at all that I had created all this light. I could have just Photoshopped lightning in there. It would have been just the same. But the experience, the learning, the entire story of how you get here, that was the most important part of all of this. I think about kids now, and I think about what I didn't have.
This is a very popular
and it's just going to play the sound.
Small, strong,
how do you
easy to tie.
But I think like, you know, I heard a story about a dad who'd been fishing for some 35 years, asking his son if he wanted to join him, you know. His son had never gone fishing. And his son looked up on YouTube University and learned everything there was to know about fishing in about a half a day. And so they went out fishing, and his dad is telling him all this stuff, and his son is saying like, yeah, I know how to tie a lure. I know how to do all that. He's like, come on, man, this took me 35 years to figure out. And kids now, or people, all of us now, get this experience to now learn so fast. But the problem with that learning was, you know, they got out there to fish, and he's like, well, fine then, know-it-all. If you know how to do this, go ahead and tie that lure. And the kid couldn't, right? His hands weren't used to it. He might have 35 years worth of knowledge, but his hands weren't there. I think learning is by far the most life-giving portion of anything we can possibly do. It, in and of itself, allows our imagination, allows us to stop in times of hardship. Learning is the only way that we can actually begin to divert. So let's talk about the general human experience. I like this quote. This is from Psychology Today. Human beings are both brilliant and aberrant, sensitive and savage, exquisitely caring and painfully indifferent, remarkably creative and incredibly destructive to self and others. I love that because it practically says nothing while saying everything. That's wonderful. What a great breakdown of the human experience. They're absolutely right. I have to also look at my notes while I'm doing this. All right. So with all of that being said, I think we've probably figured this out by now, but that opening scene, you know, that's my story. That's where I was. I was in that park. I had a book on my chest because I was sleeping there for almost 6 months. I didn't have a house. I didn't have anything. I had just left music behind. I think, you know, in my bio, I wrote that I was burnt out. I don't think that's fair. I think music has an inherent magic about it. And I think that magic was fleeting for me, and I didn't want to see it go. So I didn't want to go back. The human experience is that of hardship and beauty, very similar to that quote. Everything about it can be disastrous and powerful and enlightening. It's why, personally, I don't think of anything in my life as good or bad. I think of everything as here. I had that book on my chest, by the way, because I thought, if I wear halfway decent clothes and I put a book on my chest when I sleep, maybe someone will think like, oh, that fat man just passed out while he was reading, and then they won't roust me. And it worked. No one ever bothered me, which was really nice. Sorry if I divert from my path sometimes, just to tell a silly story, but that's what we're here for. So outside of that, I was faced with all three of these questions. And to be fair, at any given point, I think we're all faced with all three of these questions and we answer them all the time. But in that circumstance, going and studying at a diner and learning as much as I possibly can about a brand new endeavor of photography and design, which way would you go? Which way would you go? Would you seek some kind of stability in your life? Would you create some new perspective for yourself? Or would you just keep plugging along? Create a new perspective. I love that. Cool. So first, I went to the wrong one. I got to actually click on it. I forgot. Create a new perspective. There we go. Okay. First, we have to ask ourselves, is anything actually new? And then we have to revisit that idea of where does imagination actually come from? So first, nothing is new, right? I mean, even consider the wheel. That was a rock first, right? Like, I mean, it wasn't new. The idea is we are synthesizing all the time information. We're reorganizing these ideas, right? If I were to write a new song, something new, everyone would fucking hate it. No one would get it, right? But if I'm able to synthesize things that I like and build an aesthetic and build a choice and build something that I prefer, and I was able to then manifest those things together to create a new version, well then, shucks, I might find that other people are starting to follow along. Maybe they like my song, you know? So with that, when we create a new perspective, it's not like all of a sudden we're just like, we're saying like, well, you know, I've never tried hopscotch, so I'm going to be a professional at that now. You know, it's like we take from our experiences, we take from these things that we love. And so we take from the strengths that we've built, and we take from the ideas that we've gathered, and we start to manifest a perspective that can allow us some kind of freedom in whatever choices we would like to make in the future. So with that, it is rooted deeply in imagination, right? We really are hindered by, how do I want to say this? We're hindered a little bit by our own ignorance. We're hindered by what we think we know when it comes to imagination. You know, one of my favorite quotes, is from, I think, the most divergent person of the 20th century. It says, how can you feel confined when you're in touch with the universe? Any guesses on who said that? That's unfair. No one's speaking. I'll tell you. It was MacGyver, which is amazing. Come on, MacGyver, dropping the big bombs. I love it. That dude could make like a bomb out of like a shoe and a stick of dynamite. I don't know, probably something more creative than that. Anyway, but I love that he's like the most divergent dude. And when you talk about imagination, that's exactly it. When you're in touch with the universe and you release yourself from what you think you know, imagination can begin to develop. And that comes, I'm going back to Goddard one more time, it comes from the notion of desire. What we desire can fuel our imagination. How we get to that is where divergent thinking comes in, right? How we get to access that desire is where we can begin to develop a path. So when we talk about developing a new perspective, it's not new per se. It's all about understanding what is desire, where does imagination take me, and really, this is probably a terrible secret to say, but really, why would I do anything in life that's not just fun all the fucking time? And so that in and of itself can provide us with a lot more connection universally to each other. All right. So moving forward, we have to talk a little bit about discovery, and in particular, creative discovery. So with this is finding, and I'm going to put this in quotes now because we're talking about new, but finding new ways to look at an existing challenge. All right. This is kind of where we were talking, right? Is that now we're starting to say, okay, I've now developed a brand new concept of how I think. I've been learning this entire time. I've been dragging in all of my strengths and all of my understanding of the universe. And I've been releasing myself now from anything that I think I might know. And I'm now beginning to connect, and I'm beginning to alter my own perspective to allow myself creative thought. As you do that, we all strive for the same thing. We strive for the big life. This is the question, and this is the answer that we all crave. What's the big life? You know, we all want it, right? Is your version like an awesome house or a career where you're super appreciated and, you know, everything that's around you is love, you know? I think, you know, like for me, like I always wanted a house where like there was like a big tree growing through the middle of it, and it had like swings instead of stairs. And then like my bedroom would be like a pool, and I just like slept on the water, you know? And I think imagination is the only way that we can find this big life. The creative thinker is the one that can fuel their desire and put their reality in their head. I heard this wonderful story about there was a woman that was designing a bunch of costumes for a really famous play director. And they were butting heads over and over and over and over. And she just was starting to really get fed up. She's having to do like 15 designs. And, you know, the director's like going, this chump doesn't know what the fuck she's doing. And so like, it was just this constant battle. Well, she made the conscious decision to then say, okay, I'm going to imagine a totally different reality right now. And it's an exercise. This is not easy to do, but she imagined a reality where every breakfast, lunch, dinner, and any time in between, she started saying, you know what he's telling me? He's telling me that he loves this design. It needs some tweaks. And I'm telling him, thank you. I appreciate your input. And we're having a wonderful time creating together. As she did this over and over and over, you know what happened? Both of them started to believe it. And that became the reality. They actually had a wonderful collaboration after she adjusted her thought, after she took her imagination and fueled her desire of actually wanting to collaborate. There's also a term for this. Oh gosh, where do I have it? There's a term in psychology for this. It is not on my sheet. Where is it? Shoot. Where's Bronwyn? Bronwyn, help me. No. Interpersonal neurobiology. This is Dr. Dan Siegel. It's wonderful. He says, the mind is a relational process that essentially regulates the flow of energy. I love this. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Basically, if you make a conscious, imaginative decision to be a specific way, you actually influence everybody else around you. Dan Siegel is saying, hey man, we're all like linked, you know? And I imagine that that's how Dr. Dan Siegel talks, which is kind of my favorite thing. Hey man, I'll tell you what, I think your brain is like my brain. Anyway, okay, so, but I love this idea of being able to influence each other just specifically because of what and how we can imagine. This is connection. This is power. All right, so we're starting to finally develop our life. Hey, photography's coming in, design is coming in, clients are coming out. Oh my God, we're having fun. Oh my God, it's a nightmare. Oh my God, it's fun. Oh my God, it's a nightmare. And so now we have to start to really hone in on what we want. What do we want to understand about the furthering of our discovery? And so through this, do we want to define our desires, which are, remember, the thing that fuel our imagination? Do we want to seek further inspiration? Do we want to look to outside sources, and how do we do that? Or do we want to create an alternate storyline that supports our life moving forward? I like this pause. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, it's a nice, this one is going to be a little more evenly split.
Cool.
We're going to get a critical mass because it was heavily, it was really clear last time. This
one's right down the middle.
We get to see the results. Everyone else must wait in anticipation. There's literally a couple more people. We might actually have everybody. 5 more seconds. Chime in. Okay. What do we do?
Wow. Well, define your desires was 38%. Okay, I love that. Wow, that's hard. To everybody who voted and all the rest of this, I feel really bad. But again, we're on one path similar to life. So no take backsies, we got to do it. So define your desires. All right. So here we go. Here's the questions we have to ask ourselves. I like all of these slides having questions. They're kind of fun, you know. So with that, our desires drive our imagination, right? And so our imagination then defines our future, and our desires, in a way, after defining our future, then create our overall journey. Okay, so what the hell does that mean? So let me look at my little sheet. So we've already said, when you can picture the future that you want, your imagination will make it real for you. Now, that doesn't come without creating opportunity. That doesn't come from, or that doesn't come without investment in your ideas, in your imagination. But what it does come, or what it does come with, is the sense of, if you can fake yourself out and create in a completely alternate reality, it will become your reality. You know, there's a series of studies having to do with how we perceive different from one another and what actually is real. I love the idea of desire being the fuel, but how do we define that? How do we discover where our desire lies? And I think in a way, we've been approaching this from saying desire fuels imagination, but I almost think both. I think imagination can also fuel desire. Remember a long time ago, I wrote a song. Yeah, it might have been influenced by some mind-altering substances, but either way, it was a song that was a personification of creativity and a personification of inspiration, and the two were having a conversation. It was a duet between the two. And the realization was that creativity required inspiration for its very existence. But inspiration didn't give a shit that creativity had anything to do with it. And so it was kind of a breakup song. You know, I love that idea of when we look at desire and when we look at imagination, it truly is a pairing that can flip back and forth. So when you run into a wall, when you run into something where you don't know what you desire, you don't know which way you'd like to go, you can turn back on imagination, and imagination can fuel a more creative thought. So with that, I think, how do I want to say this? I think a big part of our lives that we tend to forget is that it's okay to name our needs. And I think when we stop and we realize what we need, not just to live or not just to exist, but what we need to create and what we need to think and what we need to move forward, those needs are all things that can fuel our desire. But I think that those needs create, or those needs require imagination. So with that, when we start talking about, okay, our desires are now fueling our imagination, and simultaneously our imagination is fueling our desire, and our journey is beginning to kind of trudge along, and we're starting to really figure out, okay, I'm feeling really good. I'm feeling really good. Now we run into this question, this big question of, all right, do we want to create a process so we don't have to continually run back and forth and try to figure out which one is this inspiration, is this, or imagination, is this desire, which one, how are we going? Do we want to create a process that we can lean back from, or do we want to release from all of the conventions that we've set ourselves on? And I leave this to you. I told you this was going to get kind of hippie. Don't worry. It gets way more hippie as we go.
I think you've got an answer to this one, Dave.
It smells like patchouli in here. Okay. Create a process is the winner. I love it. All right. So we've said desire fuels imagination. Imagination is simultaneously fueling desire. And so what we do is we say, okay, I don't want to have to go through this every single time. I'm going to create a process. So when you create a process, you have to ask yourself, well, shit, did I just pigeonhole myself? Now, how am I going to divert from a process I just built? I think from a pragmatic standpoint, even if you're in UX or marketing or anything like that, we stumble into this whole realm of, well, this is how I work and this is how we work together. And if I divert from that, it's confusing both for me and confusing for you as the client. And I think once we create a process, it almost hinders our creativity. I don't think the process is bad, but I definitely think that it has the tendency or the potential of getting us stuck. And so when we look at process, we have to break everything down and say, how big or how small does this process actually exist? Is this a process that's only specific to how do I go about reimagining something? Or is this a process that says, well, I know when I do a project, I imagine and then I deliver, and I have 6 steps in between. These are the bigger questions when we start to get into process, right? And so where that really leads us, when we define a process is that the end is predetermined. We know where we're going. We know what we have to deliver. when you create process, the understanding is the assumption of future fuels your imagination. I can say that maybe a little bit different, but assumption of future, right? It's the acknowledgement in ourselves that our reality is fueled by a thought, right? Let's take a second and back out. The future is based only on imagination. Our physical body can't catch up until now. So the future doesn't exist. Does that make sense if I say it like that? The concept here is we assume that our process will lead us to an end that we know is coming. So because of that, it's predetermined. And that brings me to what divergent actually is. And I think divergent and divergent thinking in particular, well, here's the spoiler. I don't think it fucking exists. I don't think that there's any such thing as divergence. And here's why. J.P. Guilford is kind of the guy who went out and started all these studies to actually look at the difference in terms of phrasing between divergence and convergence. And in the Encyclopedia of Creativity, which I love, there's a book called the Encyclopedia of Creativity. It's wonderful. They actually developed all these tests to figure out who has a divergent thinking pattern, right? I like taking creativity as a notion and then just like adding a standardized test to it. It feels like that's such a great way to really encourage creative thought. And so anyway, all of these tests basically determine like, well, are you weird? Are you not weird? You know, and so I kind of think that this is like a beautiful place to start, because that in and of itself is telling us that divergent thought is predictable. Divergent thought is just a bunch of phrases, you know, like when you take the Torrance tests of creative thinking or structural of the intellect learning abilities tests or any of these goofy things, you know, like it is telling you that there is a predetermined path for you. And if we were to back that out even more, let's get real heady. And let's say, maybe the universe is already predetermined for us. Regardless of choice, regardless of any step we take, there is a predetermined end that the universe has allowed for us. So, does that mean that divergence can exist? No. It means that any way that we would have taken through this choose your own adventure, it means that there was a predetermined end to get to this slide, to talk about this idea. The universe works exactly the same way. There is no diverting. Every choice you make has an end. I think this could bring us to a really wonderful thing called the value theory in philosophy and social science. This is a Laszlo theory. This has to do with core and B values. The entire idea is, okay, if I were to ask you, hey, why do you want to make money? You could say, so I can buy food. And you're like, okay, well, why do you want to buy food? So I don't starve. Okay, well, why don't you want to starve? So I don't die. Okay, well, why don't you want to die? So I can live. Well, what are you going to do with life? Blah, 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 blah. And so as you get down to a point where there's no more answer and you've hit a wall, you define your core. You define your core value. And I would admit, I don't think divergent thinking, I don't think that creativity is likely the core for any of us, but it can fuel the decisions that we make. And I think my favorite core value that leads creativity and leads divergent thinking is that of kindness. so we can realize that the entire world of creativity is on a predetermined trajectory, and that nothing we do can actually divert it from that, and inevitably leads us to a convergence of each other and self. Or we could talk about Lillevard. Anybody ever hear of Ingmar Bergman? Ingmar Bergman's one of my favorite film directors. He spent his entire life and career studying questions like this. What's death? What's life? What is kindness? What is joy? What is creativity? And in his final movie in 1982, he wrote it about his grandkids. And he used this phrase, Lillevard. And he says, this means little world. And his exploration into the little world was the connections made on a small, small level. I don't actually believe that there is no divergence and that the entire world has some truth that's pre-planned for us. I think inevitably we get into, well, do we even have choice? Do we even have free will? I think that's where that all leads. And that's scary. But I love the idea of the little world. I love the concept that everything that we do to connect comes from kindness, comes from core values. And everything that we do to divert our thinking only brings more attachment. The more we study self, the more we study creativity, the more we learn about our own imagination, the more we learn about desire. All of these things from the core of kindness can provide us with a divergent path that brings everyone together. There's a concept in Buddhism of a diva, D-E-V-A. The diva is one who just walks their path, but others glom onto this, and we get a sense that every step that they take is the right step, and so we follow them. You know my favorite thing about the diva? They have no idea. They're just going about their lives. We know people like this, everybody here. You know people who you follow no matter what they do. And they don't know, but they're acting from kindness. They're acting from joy. They're acting from creativity. And I think that these things, regardless of what alternate path could we have taken and what choice do we regret and what reality do we bring ourselves into when we act from kindness and connection? Well, then we find convergence and we find divergence is one in and of, I guess they're the same thing, right? It's the idea that you can't have one without the other. But after all of this has been said, and after we've gone pretty hippie-tastic, I do want to really reiterate the fact that, you know, this adventure is really yours to choose. And at any point, if you feel uncomfortable about making a divergent choice, just remember that kindness and remember that convergence may inevitably exist at the end of this, and you're held and you're safe. And that's all I got.
Scott, everyone come off mute if you'd like. Thank you, Scott. That was amazing.